Good morning to everyone. I think it's actually afternoon in most parts of the world. We have today Shri Rajeev Chawla, who is synonymous with using technology for furthering government, and we are lucky to have him today. Mr. Chawla has had a fantastic tenure of over 35 years. In fact, he initiated key projects such as the digitization of land Karnataka and laid down the foundations of projects such as Bhumi. In 2007, he actually received the Prime Minister's Award for Excellence in Civil Service, and he also received the Distinguished Alumnus Award from IIT Kanpur, which happens to be Sri Chawla's alma mater. Thank you so much, sir. Thanks for taking the time to be part of our session here. Um, Sir, as I mentioned, you have been absolutely synonymous with using IT for technology. And we are living in a country where all the state governments and central governments are actually welfare governments. And yet, for decades, we have not been able to provide welfare at a large scale in an efficient manner. And so you have taken very, very significant steps in trying to solve that problem. Could you share with us some of the key initiatives that you have taken for the government and how you have looked at solving this problem of distributing welfare in a more effective manner, sir?
Jajit, I started working in the e-governance area about 25 years back. I was lucky, and it was about 1998. And then, as you explained, started with this land records digitization project. It had 200 lakh plots and 50 fields in each plot. That makes it 1 billion fields, 100 crore fields. And it got digitized in 2001. At that time, of course, there was nothing called e-governance in this country, so it was much ahead of time. And then, of course, it got replicated across country, thanks to Mr. Pramod Mahajan, the then IT minister, taking this project as the first uh, horizontal replication project across country. I must also tell you that this project is so difficult that even today, the couple of states who have not been able to complete the same after 25 years. And then, of course, we realize that once you digitize and you centralize, what do you do? You have, in the earlier manual system, you had 10,000 village officials distributing these records. You have now digitized them to 200 sub-districts. Now, are you meaning to say the data is centralized and so are the services? That would be very bad. You're going back. So we came up with this rural telecenters project in Karnataka called Nemadi. This was much ahead of the CSC SPV, which came much later. So we started in the 2006 year with Nemadi, which were 800 telecenters in rural areas run on a PPP model. Not because of fun, because we faced a real problem as to how do we ensure that these centralized records are now available in a decentralized manner. So this came as a need of the decentralization because otherwise politically it was difficult. And then of course we did many other projects, including Bangalore one, which was integrated citizen services delivery, again in the year 2004 or 5. I remember now I set up a department called EDCS in the 2005 year. EDCS means Electronic Delivery of Citizen Services. And imagine I give marks to myself thinking 20 years back, the name called EDCS, Electronic Delivery of Citizen Services. So imagine how futuristic Karnataka was. And then, of course, many, many projects happened.
In fact, the pleasure and honor of working with you in EDC, if you recollect, in 2005. And from there, there's been a long journey, and you have come to almost the epitome of trying to help every single citizen, essentially achieving Antodaya through the project called Kutumba, and which has earned you the nickname the Family Man. So, if you could tell us more about Kutumba and how it's really helping out the person on the street, the Antodaya that we try to achieve.
We realize that how childish we are that we as a state, I'll not say as a nation, we as a state in Karnataka have so many databases and we still ask citizens every time about their data. And so unfortunate and so depressing for the citizens. It is also depressing for the government employees. And therefore, we said, whatever may happen, we have to create a database of families. Now, we were not talking about citizens. We were talking about families because many a times family is a parameter for giving benefit and not the citizen. For example, take the case of housing. You require family as a unit. You don't give house to an individual. You give house to a family. And therefore, you needed a family as a database. And then, of course, the attributes. You should know his income, his caste, educational levels, how much handicap, health problems which are there, only from a point of view of benefits, not things like HIV, etc., which are purely personal. And then, of course, many other things like where is he located? How do you reach out to him in emergency? So, do I have their coordinates of the house? What are the other parameters which are there with him? All this so that, for example, the land owned by the person, the crop grown by the person, so that we don't ask any data from the citizen. And just by taking his family ID or Aadhaar, after all are same things, I can actually tell you what all he is entitled to. Now, thankfully, in Karnataka, it was not very difficult to do because of last 20 years, we had large amount of databases. It was just a thinking. I think we were too foolish not to have done it earlier. After all, land, Bhumi came 2005. Fruits came in 2016. The caste and income database came in 2015. In fact, Jajit, you should be asking me the question, why were your eyes not opened much earlier? Are you so dull that you were not able to see this? And of course, it's fine, we delayed, but we about 3.5 years back, we set up this Kutumba database, which is of course a very alien concept in other parts of the state, other states. But in Karnataka, it's a well familiar thing. You have a database of 175 lakh families and about 5.5 crore people. It's about 80% of the population. And these are all people who actually interact with the government. In any case, we are not interested in reaching out to people who don't reach out to government. And the objective is not to maximize the revenue or to find out who is not paying taxes. No, it's a welfare part. And therefore, what is more important is those people who interact with the government for welfare. So we now have a complete database, and I must tell you that this database is dynamically updated. We did not go to field to collect any data because we knew that if we go to the field, it's too costly, number one. Number two, there's absolutely no way to find out whether data which would come would be neutral, truthful, and accepted by the other departments. We connected to various databases, picked up this data, and because you have an integration with the other databases, the registry keeps on getting updated. So this database is now functional and is functioning very well to give various services.
Right. No, sir, in fact, the question that you asked as to why it did not happen earlier, I think we are all aware why these things are so complex and why it's not just a technology solution, but a massive process change because connecting these databases in siloed departments is not easy. So what are the key challenges you faced when you went through this journey of taking something which is quite obvious, but execution is extremely challenging on that?
Now, the first problem was that concept of, the concept of this is my database. And now that's very natural. Human beings are made like this. So everybody says this is my database. Now here my credibility worked. There are two ways in which projects can be done. One is political will and the other is administrative will. Now in Karnataka, we were able to administratively manage it. And the credibility helped. People understood that it makes sense to have this project. We worked very hard to to convince every department that, look, it's going to help you. And then, of course, the second question was, how do you connect these databases? Even if there is a Aadhaar, so how do you kind of handle the Aadhaar sharing problem? How do you ensure that in spite of Aadhaar so-called not being shareable, you connect using such identifiers? And we find out our native ways. Somewhere there were transitive relations. A is related to B and B is related to C. So A is related to C. So we had to do that. For example, in National Population Register, we had SECC was connected to National Population Register. And National Population Register has Aadhaar. So we therefore, via NPR, we reach SECC to pick up the deprivation factors and occupation and other details, which of course were dated, but it was good to connect to SECC. So if you really ask me what was the challenge, there were two folds. One, how do you convince department to share data? And second, of course, is that the size of the project. I mean, I know I am oversimplifying it when I said it happened. There were the size, you imagine getting data from National Population Register means Census of India, getting SECC data, getting PDS data, and then connecting them. And then when you have transitive relations like A and B and C, then again connecting them. It was not a direct one-to-one connection, it was via connection. And then
Right.
aberrations in data. So it was a tough job, which thankfully I got 4 years to do this work. And I think time helped us because it required time, but it happened.
Right. And the continuity, because you stayed in that same role for that long. Given your knowledge base, I think that definitely helped. But on top of creating the family database, which is just one part of the problem, an extremely complex problem which you were able to solve, the second part of the problem was how do we distribute the benefits to these people that have been identified through the system, and understand that you went ahead and created something called Suvidha. So, what was Suvidha and how did it work with Kutumba, and what was the benefit that came out of it, out of these two systems working in tandem?
So there were two issues, and therefore we came with Suvidha. One was that when I when I when I told them that we can give benefits suo moto, there was a problem because if I throw data suo moto, one, of course, people lose discretion. So you're throwing data suo moto. And second is the data becomes all eligible people get into the system, which means that your budget increases. I don't know, government has to take political and administrative calls that if there are more eligible people for a universal scheme, should budget be a constraint? Like, for example, PM Kisan budget is not a constraint. Then why for scholarship budget should be a constraint? But the fact remains that if you are excited about e-governance, there are many people who will not be excited about e-governance, but about the budget. And I think you should give them their marks. After all, they are looking after the budget. And therefore, if you can't do suo moto, and people have to apply, which in my own humble view is not the right way. People should not apply. Very unfair for us to make people apply because you want to control the budget. And you have all parameters. Anyway, that's a bigger problem. I am sure someday some answer will come. But the fact that people had to apply, then of course there should be a proper system for application. There should be. I mean, how do I even know which benefits I am entitled to? And I then you know got into knowing a startup called EasyGov, which was very enterprising. And we created a Suvidha platform where you can identify all schemes by giving your minimal parameter. Now, why I'm saying minimal? Because in case of Karnataka, Kutumba gave all the data. You give your Kutumba ID, all the data comes in. But Kutumba will also not have some data. For example, it will not know about toilet in your house, those micro level details. So the Subhida then is a project where you can actually find out entitlement of your schemes. And once you know the entitlement, which schemes you are entitled to, you can then apply by clicking there because we developed on Subhida easy way of developing IT applications for those departments who did not have their own IT application. Wherever they had, Subhida will redirect to that application along with the data which it has got from Kutumba and from the citizens. But Subhida did not stop here. Suppose you are doing some selection, I should tell you the need score because after you are selecting people and you have limited budget, so you have to prioritize. So Subhida has a brilliant way of calculating the need score depending upon the parameters which an administrator sets up. And depending upon the need score, you pick up the most uh, prioritized people. Of course, Subhida also allows you to pick up people on an ad hoc basis because we understand in a political setup there would be other considerations also. Suvidha also gives you a way of calculating what is called inclusion and exclusion errors. Suppose you have not used Suvidha, suppose you have gone through a conventional system, which is the case in the country, then Suvidha will tell you how much of error is there in your system of selection, what is called exclusion error and inclusion error. How many people who were good and were ought to be included have been excluded and vice versa. So therefore, Suvidha was very handy and complementary to the Kutumba system. In fact, I must add here that Kutumba has 4 or 5 components as a social protection system. It has Kutumba, which is a database. It has Suvidha, which gives you finds out which schemes you are entitled to. It allows you to apply. It gives you the need score. It also tells you what is the inclusion and exclusion error if you don't follow Suvidha and you go in a traditional way. Another component which is there is a DBT component, which is completely Aadhaar based because Kutumba database it is under 44B2 of Aadhaar Act and it is seeded with Aadhaar. The financial address, namely the Aadhaar, can then be used to trigger a payment through a DBT platform, which is completely Aadhaar based and you don't require the account number. So that's the third component. And the fourth component, of course, is the beneficiary registry. We have a complete registry of the beneficiaries. We can tell you which family has got how many benefits and which citizen has got how many benefits. Why it is important? Because that itself can be one exclusion or inclusion factor. The fact that you have got large amount of money can be a good exclusion factor. So that's the fourth component. And the final component is a public grievance redressal system, which allows you to complain to the government that your data, which is stored in Kutumba, is not stored properly.
Right. I think that's it's a very patiently built system, and I think I remember you saying that Taj Mahal was not in a year, and that was your refrain 20 years back. So it's taken, in fact, 20 years to build all the systems that you built, pretty much the same time that it took to build Taj Mahal. But along with it, sir, in fact, you mentioned the details of the Aadhaar Act under which you had put things together. There have been concerns about privacy, and the government of Karnataka is probably one of the first ones in the world to come out with a government privacy framework, the e-Sahmati consent framework, which is really challenged how government can be working within the consent based privacy framework. Could you tell us more about what was the motivation? What does eSahmati do? And also, if entities outside of government can take advantage of eSahmati?
That's a very exciting question. But one point which more I like to tell about Kutumba is that we never went and did any survey in the field. This whole data is from the government sources. We did not intrude into the houses of the people, and we never, and therefore not only disturb their privacy. Apart from that, we did not have data which was given by them. It was a government data which was always with government. Coming to e-Sahmati, we realize that look, this data, and not just Kutumba data, we have a big database called Farmers Database, and we can certainly talk about it on some other day. The farmer database is a database of 70 lakh farmers in Karnataka with the crop they grow, the lands they have, of course, connected to Bhumi, and then, of course, the weather conditions, the benefits they have got from the government, the soil type. Now, this amount of data, and then, of course, data in Kutumba, the data in NAD, the National Academic Depository, where we have 3 crores student records, 3 crore records of students. Now, this data can be so useful for the industry. It can be so useful for the startups. But can we really give this data to these companies or startups without the consent of the citizen? And therefore, we came up with e-Samati, which is based on DEPA. This DEPA is a framework evolved by Niti Aayog on the privacy thing, and we implemented this electronically. And I'm proud of it that no other state or union government, any ministry, has come up with the e-Samati framework. E-Samati framework is agnostic to any data fiduciary. That means any data fiduciary can connect to it, whether it is of Telangana, Andhra, Tamil Nadu, UP. And then any citizen can connect to it using Aadhaar as a sign-on. And then, of course, when a request comes from any data seeker, which is a private entity, which is registered on e-Samati, the data will be given by the data fiduciary to the data seeker with the consent of the citizen. That means without citizen consent, data doesn't go. But the data, it can now go electronically signed encrypted data. You encrypt the data with the public key of the entity seeking the data. So even e-Samati is blind to it. Data goes and they can use. So therefore, think of it here. You have so many agri startups. If I tell them, if they ask this question, for example, who are the people who are growing tomato in Kolar, which is 50 kilometers away from Bangalore, and which will harvest in the month of March, I can give you the data. I can give you the coordinates of those farmers. We can give you the phone numbers of those farmers, let alone of those farmers, of course, with the consent of the farmers. Now imagine it's a win-win situation for everybody. So e-Samati, in my view, will go a long, long way. What came as account aggregator in the case of financial inclusion, e-Samati will do in case of all government databases. And pardon me for saying so, account aggregator will handle only small set of people. E-Samati will handle each and everybody, and especially those who are poor. It will handle everybody. So the educational result records can be sought by Infosys from Jayajit Bhattacharya in a jiffy. Jayajit gives his consent. The data goes from the National Academic Depository, it's digitally signed by NAD, encrypted with the public key of Infosys. It directly goes to them. They maintain it as a signed XML in their database, and they don't need to have any physical verification, which is a pain. Takes 6 months to 12 months and a lot of money also.
Right. So, in fact, one of the characteristics of your operations has been to use private sectors, startups, GovTechs, and you mentioned EasyGov as one of the entities that you used. And also, your solutions are supporting private sector, like the one you mentioned about eSamati, that can be used by agri startups, by other startups. Um, how can startups and private sectors actually support what you're doing and leverage all the new infrastructure that you're building up? In fact, eSamati to me sounds almost like a platform, like a UPI platform, which can be used by multiple entities. So it's almost like a digital utility. So how can the larger ecosystem in India and the larger digital economy in India be able to leverage what you've already built for Government of Karnataka?
So two things. One is on the software designing. And I must say that I found a brilliant organization in EasyGov. I'm sure there'll be many more I have not seen. I have been here for 35 years. I'm sure they would be hidden somewhere. But if they work with the government to find out these new solutions, solutions like uh, inclusion exclusion errors and dynamically drawn graphs which find out all this is brilliant way of working. And I was told that EasyGov worked with many scientists to derive this. So that's on the part of the making the IT systems electronic. On the other side, e-Samati framework or fruits framework, for example, can give hooks to the private sector where they hook on. And then, of course, we help them, and of course, they help farmers and other private sectors, other type of people, not just farmers. For example, e-Samati will help the young people who are to get employment by who are connected, who are registered in a employment exchange to find out jobs. So all these startups, private sectors would get benefited a lot because they can make solutions around it. E-Samati is only a platform. We are not going to get into details now. It is left to private sector, and I'm very excited that people like World Economic Forum, who is working on agriculture, AI for agriculture, and then of course all these public sector banks, NESCOMs, and other organizations are very, very excited about e-Samati.
So, sir, you've built all these systems in Karnataka, and clearly these systems have a role for India as a country. And as you said, many other states may also be developing these systems. What is the right way to actually scale it up at an India-wide level, and what needs to be done at a state level or at a national level to really scale up these systems beyond Karnataka?
See, one thing which I see, for example, take family database. Now, as you rightly pointed out, it's actually the problem of operations. We can demystify the building operation, but I think that's not so complicated. It's the perseverance which is needed, and it is the will which is needed. If you have that perseverance, you are allowed to work for a long time. Perseverance is equally important. Just because you are allowed to work will not happen. So that is one part. So where there is no rocket science there, anybody can develop if we give them simple protocols. But the second part is, Jaijeet, where e-Samati type of platform. I don't think they should be written again. They are a simple code. That code should be reused by everybody. So what we have suggested through a government order is that anybody can use e-Samati. Why should you write again? After all, what is so great about it? It's agnostic of fiduciaries. It just is a consent framework. So to answer your question, how do you scale out? Some of them will be scaled out like fruits and Kutumba, depending upon the states, because it's a database. They have to be built. The software is only incidental there. But I think in a software project like eSamati, etc., which are pure platforms, I think other states should just cut, copy, paste them. They can take the services of eSamati to leapfrog into the implementation stage.
So that's a great point you mentioned. Unfortunately, we have almost come to the end of our half an hour slot that we had, but I have a very pertinent question in terms of the fact that we did speak about open sourcing all government code for a very long time. And for the last 20, 25 years, we have been saying that anything developed for one government should be released as an open source for all governments. But what seems to be coming in the way is a institutional structure. So, sir, what do you think should be the institutional structure or structures in plural, which can help scale up what you mentioned, and how do we make sure that Kutumba or the concept of Kutumba and the code base and so on can be replicated at a national level?
So as I told you that as far as the code base in Kutumba is concerned, it's all grounds up from NIC. So data is not a problem. I mean, the code is not a problem. And I think, with my experience of last 30 years, I don't really think that the code has been a problem. There are two other issues, and I'll cut into the time because your 5 o'clock slot is getting close. One is the data, huge data, huge. As I said, 100 crore records, 100 crore fields in Bhumi. They had nothing to do with technology. And the second thing is the implementation challenges. Unfortunately, these can't be replicated. Implementational challenges you will have to bear. You will have to bear yourself. And similarly, the data will have to be created. So they will have to do it themselves. We can tell them good practices, etc. But finally, they will have to work hard and achieve it.
Thank you so much, sir. I think this has been an extremely enlightening session for all of us. And I think this is the start of the next generation of government sponsored platforms, which will be having a deep impact on not just the government, but the industry, as you pointed out. And we keenly look forward to it. And with that, thank you so much, sir. Thanks for spending your time and sharing your thoughts with us.
Thank you, Jayji. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.